evaluate for x equals negative 2, y equals 4, and z equals 2. Just a little bit. This will be like number 21. And what I'm noticing as I walked around, I'm sure Miss Piccolo would agree, that some of you are having a few issues with, what do I start with first? What do I do first? What's the first thing I need to do? And in all the problems, change negative exponents to positive ones. Bless you. It's what you should always be doing first. I'm going to write that even off to the side. Change negative exponents to positive by moving them. Let me make sure you can read that. Change negative exponents to positive by moving them. That's the very first thing that I recommend you do. So when I look at this problem, number 21, I only see one negative exponent, and I see this negative 2, and it only applies to the y. So the very first thing I do is I kind of circle it like this. And I think of it as everything's in the numerator. It's all in the numerator. And what do? I move negative exponents to the opposite side. If it's in the numerator, it goes to the denominator. If it's in the denominator, it goes to the numerator. And it becomes a positive exponent in the other place. See how that moved down and became y squared down in the denominator? That's it. This is 2x z squared over y squared. Now what the back side of your worksheet's going to do is it's going to ask you to plug in numbers. It's going to start saying evaluate. That means instead of your x being just an x, what if x was negative 2? Plug that in. What if instead of your z squared, you knew that z was 2, plug the 2 in. And if you knew that y was 4, plug the y in and see what you would come up with. I recommend you just do parentheses when you plug in your numbers. Instead of x, I have a negative 2. 2 times negative 2. Hi. Yeah, he's here. Thank you. Instead of z squared, we know that z is 2. Instead of y squared, I know that y is the same thing as 4. And I can simplify this. If you're doing this on your calculators, make sure you're using parentheses. I say that because calculators are only as good as what you punch into them. 2 times negative 2. Well, I got to do exponents first. I have to square this. So what I like to do is I just do it piece by piece. I go like this and then make it a 4. 2 times negative 2 is negative 4 times 4 over 4 squared, which I know is 16. And that's negative 16 over 16, which is negative 1. This is as hard as it gets. I still want to emphasize your calculators are only as good as what you plug in. If, for instance, you punch this in, that is going to be different than if you didn't have it in parentheses. I'm going to show you the example. Negative 2 in parentheses squared gives you 4. But if you type in negative 2 squared, it's going to do negative 4. And the reason is the difference between this and this are the parentheses. This one doesn't. You only square the 2, then you do the negative, whereas this one has that negative 2 squared. Switching over, I need you to turn your papers over. We're going to add to the back side a little bit. This is called powers of 10. Oh, you don't see it? Let me move that up there. Powers of 10. Let's talk about 1 over 100. What I like about this part of this worksheet is that this applies directly into science class. If you've ever used scientific notation in your science class, this is a connection between our class and their class. Right?
Wait, so when they're asking us to turn it into a decimal, it's scientific notation?
They just want a decimal, not scientific notation.
But if you turn it into a decimal, you get a smaller number, not just like a decimal value. Like, for example, let's say you're turning 10 million into a decimal.
Right.
You get like 10 to 100,000.
Well, 10 million, you wouldn't, as a decimal, is just having the decimal place. I think you're, okay, let's not go off on a tangent real quick, okay? Let me go, I need to say, I'll come back to you on that. Okay, 1 over 100 is the same thing as, I'm not sure if you know this, but if you see these, that there's 2 zeros, guess what? That's the same thing as 10 to the second power. If there were 3 zeros, it would be 10 to the third power. That's only for powers of 10. It's the only thing that this works for, which is nice because it will make it more convenient for us. 1 over 100 is the same thing as 1 over 10 squared because there's 2 zeros, which also means because it's 1 over 10 squared, if it's a positive exponent in the denominator, we could also move it up and have it as a negative exponent in the numerator. This is the same thing as this, which is the same thing as this. This is also the same thing as putting the number 1 right here and counting 2 decimal places to the left. 2 decimal places to the left. Let me scoot that over so you can see the whole thing. If you see 10 to the negative 2, it means we can move the decimal places to the left. From here, 1, 2. It means that 10 to the negative 2 is the same thing as 0.01. And this should match up with what you already learned in 4th or 5th grade. I'll remind you what you should have learned. This is something called the tenths place. Do you remember learning that? This is called the hundredths place. And it had this THS at the end. Do you remember learning that? This is called 1/100th because we're in the hundredths place. Guess what this started off as? 1/100th is the same thing as 1 over 10 squared, which is the same thing as 10 to the negative 2, which is the same thing as 0.01. And that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to take things and switch them into negative exponents, just like this. And you're going to have to switch them into decimals. It's very easy to do. Let's see if you can do it real quick. 1 over 1,000. Okay? That is 10 to a negative number. I'm going to put a big box here, a blank spot for you. That's something right here. It's 10 to the negative something. If you know what it is, put your answer in the box and then take a peek at your neighbor's paper and see if you have the same thing. Go ahead. Put your guess. How many of you, final answer time, have 10 to the negative 3? Raise your hand. Wonderful, you are correct. That's the right answer. Now, this is how you would write it with a negative exponent. How do you write it in terms of a decimal? If I say write it as a decimal, I hope you know what it is. Point. What do you think it is? Write it down, what your guess is. And I'll tell you what the answer is in a second. The correct answer should be 0.001 or 1,000th. How many of you got that right? Raise your hand. Good. Good, good, good. That's a lot better than we were doing on the front side. This stuff you've seen before. They're the same thing. The last thing that you're going to be asked to do is to convert this into a decimal from scientific notation to a decimal, like something like this. 5 times 10 to the negative 4th power. And I hope you know how to do that. Most of you do. Let's just remind you, just in case you need to know. Right now, the 5 has a decimal place right here on the right-hand side at the end of the sentence is where the period goes. 10 to the negative 4 means you move it how many places to the left? 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. What goes in those empty spots? Zeros. This is 0.0005. Tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. 5 10,000ths is what this is. Does that make sense?